Thanks for joining us. This episode of Legends and Losers is sponsored by our good friends at Oracle NetSuite. To turbocharge the growth of your outfit, go to netsuite.com/legends. On this episode, one of the smartest and funnest guys I know to talk to, Duncan Davidson. He's a multi-time billion-dollar company creator turned venture capitalist who is a co-founder of Bullpen Capital here in Silicon Valley. On this episode, we talk about the coming robot apocalypse and what to do about it, the impact of a universal basic income and should we or shouldn't we have one, and why machines and people are going to live happily ever after. All right. Joey Ramone said, "Hey ho, let's go." And David Bowie said, "We can be heroes." Hello, my legendary friends. Welcome to this fantastic episode of Legends and Losers. And the show's called Legends and Losers because legend and loser is kind of the same coin, just flipped in a different way. We can be one and we can be the other, or the other. And on this show, we try to have authentic dialogues about what it really takes with people who've been there and done that. And who are also willing to share the losery along their way about what it takes to design a legendary business and a legendary life. And if you're a longtime listener, thank you from the bottom of my heart. And if you're new, I hope somebody told you, we are not your typical business podcast. This show is definitely not for everyone. It is a free-range dialogue, and the experience you have is more like eavesdropping on a conversation. And our gimmick, or our format, is there is no format. We just try to have a real conversation about shit that matters. And man, do we have that today. Duncan Davidson's one of the smartest people I know. He's a funny guy. We have a free-range conversation that is captivating, and I think you're going to love. For more on his background, check out the show notes for this episode at legendsandlosers.com, and you can also get all of Duncan's contact information there if you want to reach out to him. So here he is from Bullpen Capital, the incredible Duncan Davidson.
So Luddites, it's interesting about the Luddites. So for the people who don't know the Luddites, in the early days of automation 200 years ago, they would take these factories building garments and they would put these steam engines in with long rubber belts, and they'd run these spinning machines that got rid of a lot of human labor. And in Lud, England. And so the people who were working lost their jobs, and they eventually got really mad and smashed all the machines. And they're called the Luddites. Their complaint was legitimate in that they were claiming two things. We don't mind you putting in the automation, but you're unemploying us. Why don't you give us some of the money you're making on automation? And the second problem they had is that they treated it as an act of violence because nobody was listening to them. Now, in history, two things happened. They were called criminals and they were sent to Australia, which is kind of funny. And the automation
explains a lot about Australia today, doesn't it?
Well, think about Australia. Captain Cook found Botany Bay and then Sydney right after those damned Americans rebelled against England. They were dumping their criminals into America, called them indentured servants. But, look at America.
Oh, I didn't know that part. I didn't know that there was a boomerang, or maybe not boomerang, but there was a re-swizzle of some of the criminals.
Yeah, well, just think of, it's even funnier than you can imagine. So first of all, America is settled, I tell Australians this, by Puritans and criminals. Australia just has criminals. And that sort of defines the two threads in American society, this puritanical thread, you can't have sex, and the criminal thread, let's sneak sex or whatever it is. But the thing about Australia, they got formed as a reversion of what happened to the U.S. Let's dump our criminals there. And therefore, they're a little bit more interesting people than boring Puritans.
I have so many Australian friends and adopted family I can't even count. I love being there. I surf with Australians.
Yeah, sure.
I love Australians because they're all pirates.
They're cheeky and they're pirates. And the funniest part of this whole story is apparently the Australians during the San Francisco 49er gold rush put all their most incorrigible prisoners on a ship, sailed into San Francisco Bay and dumped them off the ship. And they just disappeared into the morass of gold seekers. That probably explains why Silicon Valley is Silicon Valley. The criminals from Australia sort of in our gene pool.
I didn't know that. That's great. That criminal Australians helped create the Silicon Valley that we now know and love.
Yeah, bring us your tired, your poor, your criminals or something. All right, so back to the Luddites. The Luddite story has been well looked at because 10 times more jobs were created by automation than were lost by the Luddites. They did lose their specific jobs, but 10 times more jobs got created or some number like that, and nobody complained except the Luddites. If you look through history of technology, every 30 years after the Ludd situation, which is I think around 1800, there's some new technology comes along, the steamship, the railroad, electricity, the car. All these people with horses and manure shovelers are kicked out of jobs. And the same thing happened. There's a complaint by the displaced. This is unfair. You should pay us. And the powers that be say, no comprende. Who are you? Get out of here. And so life goes on because 10 times more jobs get created. And so we get all the way to the robot thing, and you have two sides in the robot debate. One side says, you idiots, you're Luddites. There'll be 10 times more jobs created by automation than ever lost. This is wonderful for technology, humanity, capitalism, everything. And the other side says, yes, but what will the truck drivers do? The modern Luddite. So we had this debate about this, and it's interesting, just like two movies, the pro-robot apocalypse people wanted UBI, would not accept the argument that 10 times more jobs would be created. They said the fateful word you never want to hear, this time is different. And you've heard this every time there's a stock market peak. 1999, this is going to blow, it's a bubble. No, this time it's different. 1929, Irving Fisher, the greatest economist of his time, we have hit a new era, a new plateau of prosperity. This time is different. So whenever I hear the word this time is different, I go, uh-oh, the bubble's about to blow, right? So interesting question then is it really different or not? Now, if it's not different, we should expect 10 times the new jobs to be created than the ones displaced. This vision that 10% of the tech elite own everything, and 90% are going to be off doing crappy jobs or getting paid to stay home and watch TV. They'll watch Roseanne or something. That vision, which is to me horrible, it's horrible vision, won't occur. But when I talk to the people that believe in the robo-apocalypse, I'm talking to a different movie. They're so convinced it's going to occur. Anyway, that's my starting point. So
I'm curious, like, have you had a chance to read Kevin Maney's new book, Unscaled?
No.
So he sees very much the similar things that you see, particularly around this dot you guys connected that we're living in 1897 in terms of the 20-year, 15-year innovation boom that happened then that's happening now. So you guys see that same thing. I think Mike Maples sees that same thing. So there's a number of you, at least in my world, that seem to agree about that. And by the way, for the record, what I have been telling people ever since you kind of made that clear to me, and then Kevin's book came out and all these things, you connect dots, right? And smart people are saying similar things, if not the same thing. I have decided that I don't know if you guys are right or not, that it's 1897 or whatever, but I've decided to play like you're right. So what I'm saying is I'm walking around going, okay, it's 1897. If you were smart and you were you, what would you do? Anyway, so that's kind of point A. Point B is Kevin's theory inside of that theory is that being a big company with lots of structure, infrastructure, physical assets, just like essentially that's essentially becoming a negative. And that everything is kind of, with technology primarily as a driver, creating opportunities for much smaller companies to be much more nimble, to essentially assemble what they need to assemble to do what they need to do digitally, and then reassemble it or reswizzle it or disassemble it. And so that a smaller company can, if you allow me to use the phrase, niche down. And by being small and focusing on a niche and leveraging technology, you're actually able to be a lot more successful than a big integrated conglomerate like a GE. And so he sees a lot of unscaling. I would call it a lot of niche downing. It's a similar kind of idea. I'm just curious, do you see that too? And if you don't, what do you see?
Well, I'm going to read the book. There's a very famous economist, Coase. He's the guy that got the US government to auction Spectrum. But he wrote a brilliant book about why vertical integration or why not. And so his argument was a company would vertically integrate. And Ford had this idea that you'd have, I suppose, rubber from tires, and you have rubber plantations, and everything you needed for a car he would own, all the way to the Model T coming off the line. Or Steve Jobs had this idea. He put his factory on the beach, sand goes in one side, computer out the other. It's all silicon. Coase argued that the reason why vertical integration works is because of the transaction costs in an external marketplace. So he's also argued that if we could lower the transaction costs, you could get rid of vertical integration and have massive different sorts of companies, but not vertically integrated, more horizontal. I think he was exactly right. And I think there's been a trend toward removing the transaction costs in a vertically integrated way. For example, we saw how Intel and Microsoft had two horizontal companies and both became massive scale. It doesn't mean scale goes away. It just means it shifts from a vertical controlled structure into more of these horizontal enterprises. And they get big or not big. And so I'll read his book because he probably has other insights. But the thing I'm seeing right now is vertical integration has shifted to horizontal own a layer. If you sit outside of the US and you look at how big Amazon, Apple, Google, Facebook, and Netflix are, you go, holy whatever, Batman, because they are so large and powerful in their horizontal segment. Facebook and Google themselves, as two entities, own almost all digital advertising today. And it's almost impossible for anybody except maybe the Chinese in a protected market to create companies of similar scale. But they're not really vertical or horizontal in scale. And going back to our blockchain discussion, I can imagine complete blockchain utilities forming like a car chain or a pharma chain, where a blockchain utility is created to bind the complete supply chain together. And they wouldn't own anything other than the supply chain part of the total business. So it's a horizontal layer. But these layers, if you own the complete automobile supply chain, that's $1 trillion type of opportunity. We're out of the billions. What's beyond a unicorn? I don't know. You're into some other mythical creature, and the Kraken or something. So these are Kraken companies. Yeah, I'm just inventing it. It's not a horse.
I like that. I like the Kraken.
The Kraken, the big evil thing out of the ocean. So
I love that.
So now let's take this back to the robot apocalypse thing. Let's assume for the moment the robot fearmongers are correct. How would it manifest to be something so scary? Well, I think it wouldn't manifest like science fiction, either a Terminator killing everybody or some type of US robotics that Amazon had in his books. That they sold the general purpose robot, everybody bought them, and we were the monopoly on robots. I think instead it'll be much more of this horizontal idea that you could imagine AI being embedded into these blockchain systems that get to be extremely clever, automated operation, and they get to be huge. And they become natural monopolies. And because they cut across international boundaries, it'll be very difficult to quote unquote regulate them. So they will sort of exist as these things outside the normal sphere of corporate enterprise. They might be open source, they might be .org, they may look like they're not a for-profit entity, but they'll become very powerful. Now,
and do you see these as you tell me how to think about them? Are these the next wave of network companies that grow, the way a Facebook or a Google grew, or
yes.
So
yes,
they
precisely.
Have network in nature to have that kind of lift, right? Is that
exactly right? You've got it. And are they scary things? Well, they're nothing like the robo-apocalypse worry, because they simply enable much more efficient transactions on these vast-scale supply chains. They're not really displacing people. There'll still be more use of people below and above the supply chain layer. So to that extent, I don't see in this vision anything like the need for a UBI. So
Yeah, I don't either. And at least as I read Kevin's book, and in the research we did with Niche Down, we talked to a bunch of smart people. Um, One in particular, this guy, Eddie Yoon, who wrote Super Consumers, an incredibly smart guy. He writes a ton for HBR. He's sort of the category guru to the Fortune 100. And both guys make an argument that as a result of all this new technology, that there will be more what most people today call upreneurs or solopreneurs. They both use this, I think it's the same term. I think they call it personal enterprises. But if you go all the way back, there used to be a cobbler, right? You used to go to the pharmacy, and the pharmacist would concoct something for you. And so there are all of these personal services that used to exist that don't exist the way they used to anymore. And in a sense, the technology allows it to come back, and personalized medicine allows people to do things, mass customization at scale. And so there's almost a technology enabled worldview of enabling individuals to leverage huge technology so they can deliver more personalized services, and you have a return to more of a personal enterprise kind of service-based economy. That's at least how I don't want to put words in their mouths, but that's part of how I read this argument of lots of opportunities for new niches and smaller, way big opportunities for much smaller entities.
well, first of all, I just bought the book on Kindle, and I'll read it the next couple of days. I think that part of the argument sounds quite sound, partly because we already see it. I mean, people talk about the gig economy and how many people are freelancing, but a lot of what they're doing is sort of low-end work, service jobs. But inside of that, there's a huge increase in very high-end creative jobs. Canva, if you're familiar with Canva, again, out of Australia, we'll keep the Australia thing going. It's one of the two unicorns that have emerged out of the newer ecosystem of venture capital in Australia, which for the first time is copying the US and doing extremely well. It's a design platform, global design platform. You want something designed. They have gobs of designers in there, and you can contract with them. So these people can create their own mini businesses because Canva provides a scale platform where the transaction costs to get hired and used go way down. So when you get this idea that these platforms lower transaction costs in the code sense, you suddenly can create a business like doing really good podcasts or doing design work, very high-end creative work. And you can pull it off because the system now allows you to become economically viable.
And to your point, Duncan, this is a world that I never would have had any view into. But my wife, Carrie, finds a lot of artisan types on Etsy. And she'll be doing a high-end corporate event, and she'll want some very special giveaway that's, handmade, that's local to, maybe she's doing it somewhere in the Caribbean or Hawaii, wherever it is, right? And she wants something very special that chances are you couldn't find or buy on your own. And she finds some kind of an artisan type of product and is able to source this on the internet and, place an order for, that is maybe in some cases the biggest order they ever got. And, and micro niches, like here's my current favorite one. We have, as you know, we have 6 hens who I'm completely in love with. And one of them, Ethel, gets her feet, she has problems with her feet. Her feet get cut and she gets infected. It gets really bad. And we've had some scares with it. So anyway, the net of it is Ethel wears booties. And Carrie was able to find chicken booties. And I forget exactly how she found them, but there's this, I think it's a husband and wife team, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know where they are. They're somewhere in the US. And they take neoprene, essentially what I would call wetsuit material, and they cut it into customized chicken booties. And they make custom booties for Ethel.
That's good.
And so, I see these things, to your point, I see these things happening everywhere. And you go, how could you make money doing these things, right? But the internet, because it's a network, allows a micro niche that if you were in a local location, I don't know how much need there is for chicken booties in one particular neighborhood or even state for that matter. But when you can reach the world, Maybe I don't know if it's a business or not, but it's probably a decent side hustle.
I love it. No, I think this is where we're going. I mean, these things in the middle, like Canva, become huge marketplaces that unlock talent. So let me circle back to the UBI. One of the arguments the UBI people make is if you had at least like half a living wage or some supplement, you could be more creative. You could chase that passion and not feel like you're going to starve. And therefore, they think that the UBI will unleash a lot of this marketplace of creative people to do what they really want to do and not what they think they should do just to survive. It's a very fair vision. That part of the vision, I think, is quite interesting versus everybody's unemployed, living in watching TV all day and getting paid a dole to stay out of trouble.
We had, what's his last name? His first name is Samuel. He's a PhD. He's an American, but he lives in Sweden, and he's the founder of the Museum of Failure in Sweden. And he's got all these wonderful failed products like Colgate lasagna and shit. And we've declared that he's the unofficial, or he's the official rather, Museum of Legends and Losers, because he's got a museum dedicated to this. And of course, he's an entrepreneur. This is his idea. He created this thing, and he came on the podcast as it was opening. Anyway, long story longer. One of the things about this that has stuck in my head, because this guy grew up an American, right, is he said he moved to Sweden. He got educated there. So the government essentially paid for, if not all, then some meaningful part of his education. And when he decided he wanted to be an entrepreneur, because of the social safety net and because he didn't have crushing student loans, he said, and I can't remember exactly, but essentially what he says, Duncan, is, look, I could take this risk because I knew that if the Museum of Failure failed, which would be kind of funny in of itself, but anyway, luckily he's doing great. But that I wouldn't lose my health care because my health care is not connected to my job. I don't have some horrible debt, so I'm not worried about that. And because I essentially have health care and there's a social safety net here, maybe my life is a bummer for a while, but essentially I can afford mentally, psychologically, and of course financially to take the risk of being an entrepreneur because of the way the society has helped set me up. He definitely made that kind of argument.
So this is interesting to me because when I was pushing on the robot apocalypse people in UBI, I tried to do it this way. I said, okay, what would the case look like? Maybe I don't believe your robot apocalypse idea and we got to do this for the tech elite not owning everything. Forget that. Let's look at it straight on as an idea. So I've done a lot of reading about whether UBI failed or succeeded. Just like socialism, there's no good example of a socialism in a society actually working. But the socialists always say, well, they didn't do it right. Okay, Russia failed, then China. No, China failed. No, it's Cuba. Well, Cuba didn't really. Venezuela. No, not Venezuela. You end up in Sweden, this fake great socialist empire paradise. But the same thing with UBI. You see examples where it's been tried. Finland just tried. I think it was Finland, then withdrew it. And the argument is, well, they didn't really try it. Okay, let's take that as a given. It's not been tried correctly and look into it. There is a way to make the two movies, the movie people watch on one side that doesn't overlap with the other, and marry them. And a guy named Charles Murray, whose name is like, he's one of these people that can't really talk at colleges anymore because he gets flamed by the left. But Charles Murray looked at UBI and made the following argument, which is, if you look at all the poverty programs that we've had since the Great Society, you've sort of forced the poor people into spending their whole life in front of the DMV. Lines, bureaucrats, processes. It's a pain in the butt to get money out of the goddamn government. And as a consequence, we put a barrier, a really huge barrier in their life, and certainly a barrier against work, because if they start working, suddenly a lot of the benefits evaporate. So the marginal cost of working is so high, you stay in this other sort of bureaucratic nightmare they live. What if we got rid of all the poverty programs, everything, except maybe Social Security, wiped them all out and just gave you UBI? And he did the following estimate. Okay, forget kids, forget retired people. I don't know what the number is. Maybe it's 220 million Americans would get an UBI. people between 21 and 65, whatever that number is. He said, let's say we give them 1,000 a month. So it'd be what, 12,000 a year. So 22 times 12 is a number. Let's call it somewhere below 3 trillion, but 2 point something trillion dollars. All right, let's say we give people that money. And how do we fix the other side of the equation? His suggestion was get rid of all taxes, payroll taxes, Social Security taxes, income taxes, everything, and replace it with a VAT. So you have one tax on economy of around 20%, and you give people $1,000 a month. So in effect, what he's created is a system where the regressive nature of the VAT is softened because of this negative income tax. And unlike the traditional negative income tax, you give it to everybody, not just people that are working. All right. It turns out you can kind of make this thing balance. Our budget now is $4 trillion, bunch of it goes to Social Security, but you could roughly get a 20% VAT to pay for a $3 trillion UBI where Social Security still fits in there somewhere. So you could have a balanced budget. How cool would that be? All right. This came from the other side of the equation, not the robot people. It came from the other side. And in my little discussion group I was talking about, I had both sides discuss this issue. It was fascinating to me. The robot people completely dismissed it, just didn't want to talk about it. And sort of the conservative people were very worried that if you give people a dole, they'll sit in front of TV and watch Roseanne all day. So both sides ended up not being comfortable with it. And I thought I'd found a way to marry both sides into a compromise. I was very disappointed.
It is interesting because the central concern of, probably no surprise to you, that I would have with the UBI or universal social income or whatever they want to call it is exactly that one. Is I have bought into the point of view, the vision that part of what makes America America is I am free, and I use that word on purpose, to go pursue my happiness. And there's an economic incentive, a capitalistic incentive, an entrepreneurial incentive, whatever you want to call that America is a place where I can better myself. And if I quote unquote work hard and apply myself in the right ways, I can change my station in life. And not only have I believed that, I have lived that. And I think that's possible in Canada, but I think it's even more possible here. I think me having the life that I've had here, there would have been much more difficult. But anyway, all that said, so I worry about, okay, well, to your point, if we give everybody 12 grand a year, the statistics around the percentage of men that are now opting out of the economy is frightening. I've read stuff that says approximately 20 to 25% of men under the age of 35 for all practical purposes are out of the economy. We know for a fact that men under the age of 35 statistically now are more likely to be living with their parents than some kind of a domestic partner, wife, spouse, etc. So I know there's a bad thing going on with young men opting out. And so long story longer, doesn't UBI provide an incentive to do that even more and is sort of the opposite of the pursuit of happiness and the American dream? Or now I haven't thought about this the way you've thought about this. I'm just curious, what's the reaction? What's the reaction of your group of intellectuals as you go to that part of the discussion?
Well, when you look at the actual test cases, and they're spotty, like I think we're trying one in Stockton, but the Finnish one and a few others. What you find is some percent of the people become banana slugs, do nothing, live on the dole, scrape and scrimp, and just like being bums. And I liken the analogy to this. I think if you look across a population, around 15% have addictive personalities. They may become gamblers, they may become alcoholics, they may become drug people, whatever it is. There seems to be a genetic propensity for a certain percent to have this addictive personality, which leads them down to a rat hole of unproductive behavior. Now, you could pass draconian drug laws like we did with the stupid war on drugs to go after this 15%, and then it appears that their addiction just manifests somewhere else, opioid crisis. So you haven't really solved anything other than create this massive bureaucracy to go after people with guns. You haven't really dealt with addictive personality. So let me say, if that analogy is true, and I don't think it's scientific or studied, it's just something that people have observed, it may be some percent of the US population male, if you want to use male, but keep it gender neutral, have a slug personality, and they would rather just sit at home and slug around, banana slug around, rather than get creative and productive. Now, do you want to create a whole tax system and structure in your society to prevent the 15% from being slugs? Or is it better to take care of the 85% and then let the slugs deal with themselves? That's sort of a societal answer. You're not going to have nobody's going to behave perfectly. You're not going to give a UBI and everybody becomes a podcaster or an artist. Won't happen. There will be some percent that'll become the slugs. You have to accept it. But I wouldn't condemn the whole idea because some percent becomes slugs. Now, if the slug percent got to 40, I'd probably condemn the idea. And I think you could manage that. This idea this guy had of a VAT plus a UBI, which has also been out there as so-called fair tax. The fair tax is a VAT-like system with a negative income tax. Their thinking is make the UBI below a living wage. Make it small, like a 12,000 years, California. I don't know what you can do here with that. Make it so small, you've got to supplement it. Or you have to live with 2 other people to share living space. You have to cohabit, so that you still have an incentive to get out there and do something. With the VAT, you capture the underground economy as well as the above ground economy. You sort of capture all economic activity as best you can. So therefore, you're at least taxing this activity and recovering some money. So they're thinking it's a much simpler way to capture most economic activity and tax it so people don't sneak into the dark black market. But at the same time, gives people an incentive to try to figure out something they're doing beyond taking UBI. That's, to me, would be the experiment to run. Now, the problem...
It is interesting. And it would be interesting to see, does it provide an incentive per Dr. West in Sweden to be an entrepreneur? Or do people just... Does the 15% number go, to your point, to 40% because people figure out a way to take their 12 grand a year and scrounge it together and whatever and live together, whatever it is they do, they banana slug with the 12 grand a year.
So I would like to see this experiment run. It's just hard for me to conceive how you could create the states of the US as a great experiments of democracy and get them to all be a petri dish for this, because it's really hard to do it. There's so many structural things you have to deal with, like healthcare, the DMV experience and all the poverty programs, the tax system and all that. I don't know how you do it. But
I almost wonder, now, Canada doesn't have a universal income, but they do have universal health care. And let's see if I can find the number while we're talking. When I lived there, I think there's approximately 30, maybe there's closer to 35 million Canadians today. And the number in my head, I'll Google it now, but of Canadians that pay federal tax, it was like some insanely low number, like 7 million or 6 million or something. Like, it was an incredibly small percentage. And I just think, okay, well then what is everyone else fucking doing? And so and I experienced this very much. There's definitely much more of a social safety net in Canada, even if there isn't a UBI. And so I don't know if that qualifies as an experiment or a partial experiment, but it doesn't seem to be working to spark entrepreneurship in Canada. Let me say it that way. But on the other hand, in fairness to Canada, the Canadian middle class is a lot more healthy than the American middle class.
Well, they sent all our criminals down to America, so that's where the entrepreneurs come from, just like the Australians did and the British. I don't know. It's an interesting question. I have not found an answer to the question. And I think the experiments that are going on are too small scale to be that illustrative. They're just trying to find that if you give UBI to some people in Stockton, they'll actually still work for a living and not become slugs. And who knows? Maybe you pre-selected the more ambitious people, and therefore it's not a population thing. But this is something I wish we could be debating in a more sensible way. Let me connect it to some other trends. There's this big fight that Trump's going through with tariffs, and he's highlighted the fact that U.S. was kind of like low tariff, everybody come in, sell your stuff to us, we're happy. And the Europeans, among other countries, had high tariffs on things like cars, and they were taking advantage of it. So he's trying to equalize it. And it highlights some of the problems with the belief system we have that free trade is good, therefore keep everything free, when the other side doesn't play the same game. One of the big things that Europe does that we don't is have a VAT. And so when we export a car to Europe, it has a 17 or 20% VAT added onto the price. Now, to some extent, they'll argue when they export a car to the US, you have sales taxes in the States, but they tend not to be 17 or 20%. And so there was this idea that the Republican tax code would add a border adjustment tax to try to mimic the effect of the VAT. So when we export, we deduct the tax, and when they import we import from Europe, they have to pay this tax, the border adjustment, like a VAT. Let me say what I'm going with this. If we got rid of the income tax system and had a VAT with a UBI, we would actually equalize a lot of the economic forces between us and Europe or other places where they have a VAT and we don't. We'd create a more level playing field. And by getting rid of the income tax, you get rid of a whole horde of people who are just going through tax avoidance and tax adjustment and a bunch of what is relatively unproductive activity, but pays a lot of people a high salary. So at some level, I kind of like this idea of the fair tax or the VAT UBI system is a more efficient system that equalizes us in global trade.
It's interesting that you say that, because I have often wondered, there's a VAT in Canada, and I was living there when it got rolled out. It's called the GST, but that's what it is, goods and services tax. And I don't know if it's still the case, but I was in Lebanon years ago visiting a friend, and he explained to me that in Lebanon they had, I don't know if it's zero income tax, but it's very low if it's not zero, and it's essentially a VAT, tax it when it moves. And so I've always wondered, why do we tax income and why do we tax wealth appreciation? Because to me, to your point, you're almost beginning to put a disincentive on that. And I think we want an incentive for people to go make money. And to your point, why not put a giant tax on consumption? Tax me when I do stuff, right? So if I want to buy 5 cars, and the price of a car, the price of what today is a $50,000 car in America, we double the price of that. It's $100,000 now. Or so we tax it when it moves, we tax it when you use it, but we provide you an incentive to make it. At least philosophically, that makes more sense to me. But again, we don't have, the last time I remember anything close to a meaningful discussion about the tax structure in the United States was when Steve Forbes was running.
Yeah, he was trying to go flat tax. But go back in U.S. history, and the Constitution did not allow an income tax. Did not allow it. We had to pass an amendment, the income tax amendment, which was passed, I think, at midnight right before Christmas, just to sneak it through Congress, along with the Federal Reserve System. And we had an income tax during the Civil War. We'd sort of gotten around that. Nobody yelled at anybody. They just let it happen. The income tax passed for 2 reasons. One is it's a very efficient way to raise lots of money for a government. And the second is it allowed you to do a progressive structure versus a flat structure. And a lot of people thought a progressive structure was more fair. Part of the reason is rich people make a lot of money. They should pay more for the services around them that they're using, etc. Now, you could argue with the VAT, they're spending a lot more money, therefore they're automatically paying their appropriate amount. That's why it came in here. I do think a lot of libertarians, which is where I fashion myself, would be happy to get rid of all of the income taxes, payroll and everything for a VAT, but they would want some kind of way to make the regressive nature of a VAT okay. Meaning, you're a poor person, you have a 20% VAT, everything's 20% more expensive. You still have your California sales tax on top. Oh my God. So you have to give them some mechanism to overcome that, to get around their daily life so they can still have the normal lifestyle that they're living. And that's where the negative income tax idea came in. So it's like if you gave people $1,000 a month as a reduction on their VAT payment, and that's one way you could think of this UBI being justified. The $1,000 a month deduction, you get cash to overcome having to overpay for groceries and stuff because of the VAT.
So in the absence of something like this, because I think all this is interesting, but our inability to have a conversation about anything substantive across the aisle in Washington or pick your state capital is stunning. I don't know why we can't talk to each other like you and I are talking to each other. We may have differing points of view about some of these things, but I'm curious to know what you think, and I try to be as open-minded as possible. And you know, for whatever reason, we just pick sides in Washington and yell as opposed to actually, as they say today, conversate.
Conversate. I like that.
And so there's a lack of conversate going on. So let's assume nothing happens, which is what, you know, often is the case. If you go back to your robot apocalypse, on one hand, listen, there's displacement with technology. The whole Luddite thing makes it very clear. But we as a society, you know, I keep hearing this number, there's 3 million truck drivers, and there's all kinds of taxi drivers and limo drivers. You know, there's all these robot jobs that are potentially going to go away. There's manufacturing jobs that might go away. You know, lots of jobs that might go away because of the robot apocalypse. Do we as a society have an obligation to try to help those displaced people, or do we take and you tell me if this is the wrong way to look at it, pure libertarian, pure capitalist point of view, which is to say, hey, listen, you need to figure shit out. Nobody gave me anything. So like fucking A, grow an IQ and, you know, reposition yourself or you're going to get positioned. And we just take a very sort of capitalistic perspective, or what do we do?
Well, let me give you some stories. So when the Clean Air Act was passed in 1970 or so, nobody was quite sure how to get rid of smog in LA from all the cars. And then there was this huge technological breakthrough called the catalytic converter. It became relatively cheap to put these in all the cars, and the air in LA cleaned up really quickly, or all across the world. So two things about that. If we had tried to clean up the problem without the catalytic converter, the cost of a car in the system would have been so big, it wouldn't have happened. People would have found a way to avoid doing it. Secondly, one of the ironies, there's an argument that what we perceive as global warming was actually created by the removal of smog, and therefore more sunlight got through. I don't know if it's true. It's kind of one of these ironies. The air got cleaner, more sunlight got through, and suddenly the world warms up. Oops.
Wouldn't that be a hysterical turn of events if that was actually true?
Yeah, I don't think it's true, but it's one of these funny little snarky things people say. So let's fast forward. Right now, let's talk about climate change. There's a desire to get rid of carbon from, you know, spewing out there. How do you do it economically? It turns out if you build a battery car like a Tesla, 8 years of carbon are in that car before it drives off the lot because of the carbon cost of building it. You build a windmill, there's so much steel, which comes from coal and has coal in it, that the carbon cost of a windmill that you've had to spend to build it probably never gets recovered in its useful life. So people think these are great renewable things. Now we're finding that solar cells are toxic waste. How do you get rid of bad solar cell? There's a consequence of this that people don't anticipate before they put it in there. So the technological breakthrough we would need on climate change is carbon capture. Could you economically put some catalytic converter-like device when a coal plant or natural gas plant is spewing CO2? It turns out somebody may have found the breakthrough the last couple of weeks. So
really?
Yeah, I'm reading about this. It's an economical way to do it, which is kind of it's a funny process, but it might work. Regardless, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. If it is, let's put carbon capture on all these things and solve the problem economically instead of by big coercive government trying to force people to behave differently. Here's where I'm going with this. It may be within AI is a solution to the robo-apocalypse fear. Garry Kasparov, the Russian chess champion, you probably remember his name.
Yeah, he's in our book. I think you or Paul turned us on to this. I think we quote him in the book about a sort of luck.
Yeah. Well, look, he's the guy that lost to the first AI robot, the Deep Blue computer. He's the world chess champion who got beat by a robot. And it really birds him. And for a long time, he couldn't deal with it because he thought the robot cheated. I mean, literally, I got to explain this for chess players. He says there was a moment in one game when the robot made a totally stupid move. A move not even a rank amateur would make. Like he moved his king sideways one square for no reason. And Gary said, the robot can't be this stupid. There must be something behind it. And he burned all this time trying to psych out the robot, where apparently in history, the robot went into an idiot loop and the program had sort of a thing. If you can't decide, just do something. And it just did some random move. So anyway, Gary got psyched out and lost the game. He then studied.
Incredible.
It's incredibly funny. Then Gary studied AI, and he's come up with a brilliant book, and he's talked about it, where his belief is, because of chess, humans will go in symbiosis with robots. Here's his example. The great chess champion of today is Magnus Carlsen. I've had the pleasure of meeting him. I almost had a chance to play him at a simultaneous match. And in those things, can you last 20 moves is kind of the issue is, can you last long enough to save your pride?
Is it like having a fun sparring session with Mike Tyson? It's like,
exactly.
If he hits me once, it's probably over.
That's exactly. You're playing horse with LeBron James, fat chance. So what he figured out is that Magnus Carlsen, this is what Gary was talking about, uses computers to improve his chess. He's constantly playing against computers. The computers now have a rating of 3,300, even the best chess players 28. So they're smarter than humans. Everybody accepts it. There had been this vision 20 years ago, well, now they'll have robots playing in the chess championship. No, nobody wants to see two robots play. You might want to see them in a demolition derby beating each other up, but you're not going to watch them play chess. So instead, the humans play with the robot and get so much better. Magnus Carlsen's chess is so precise. He can take it much deeper into the game than Garry Kasparov ever could because of the robot. So Gary says, we're now in symbiosis. Let me carry this forward a step. There are people building these AI-assisted support systems. So something goes wrong with your computer and you call up Dell. And normally you go through this long, horrible thing where they say, did you look at the facts yet? Did you go online? I'm not going to talk to you. But eventually get them to talk to you. In the future, they have a robot assist watching you. The human being talks to the grumpy customer who's mad about something and deals with the emotion. And the robot, the AI, is constantly feeding the human support person with recommendations on how to do it. They're in symbiosis. What it means is a truck driver who's at least an empathetic character could get plugged into this computer support system, totally different job, and very, very quickly become extremely successful. They don't have to go to community college. They don't have to learn computer programming. They don't do any of the old-fashioned ways of getting up to speed. It's almost as if they plug into the Matrix and then can fly a helicopter. Remember that?
Is this also like another example I've heard along these lines is you've got an EMT out in the field. There's been a car accident. There's been a heart, whatever it is. They're on a call. There's somebody whose life is in jeopardy for some medical emergency. And they are not on the phone with a doctor at the ER. They are talking to an AI doc. They have a virtual reality or augmented reality device of some kind on, so that AI doc can, quote unquote, see what's going on. And obviously the EMT is talking to the AI doc. And the thing is giving them essentially best practices over some, many thousands of similar incidents, and giving them the statistically best things or smartest things to do in this situation in a way that a doc couldn't. And so you've got a human being making the decision in the field, but you've got the best of the technology in the background. Is that what we're talking about here?
Yes.
The sort of marriage of the two?
Exactly. And people have thought for years that diagnosis of medical conditions is a very good AI area, because you could pattern recognize a vast number of incidences. Let me give you a story on this. My son goes into the hospital ER at Stanford Medical School, one of the great teaching places. And he happens to do it around July 5th or 6th. Turns out on July 1st, all the new interns show up. So he's manifesting his appendicitis. The interns come in and they poke and prod. And they all conclude, it's got to be appendicitis. And they're going to wheel him in to get his appendix out. And then the old doctor walks in and makes a sage comment. In my experience, appendicitis never manifests like classic appendicitis. It's always weird in some way. This is too perfect. So he has another test run, a scan, and it turns out it's not appendicitis. It's some little scrunched up, something on the intestine that manifests just like appendicitis. Okay. The interns.
And they were about to take his appendix out.
Exactly. So you don't listen to interns reading from books. The sage doctor had a vast experience of watching it. Well, an AI could probably mimic the sage doctor better, having seen many, many, many core conditions and proposing the right test. That would be the theory. By the way, it also tells me never go to the ER in a teaching hospital right after the 1st of July, because the interns don't know anything, but they've read all the books. This is side note.
I have a bunch of foodies in my life, and I don't consider myself one. I love great food, but I'm not like a foodie. But I love being the having the benefit of these chefs and these people who know about all the ding dong restaurants and all this stuff. And we were talking about the tragedy of losing Anthony Bourdain. And a friend of mine said to me, yeah, he taught us all so much. One of the big things he taught us is don't order the fish on Monday.
Because it's been sitting there since Friday or something.
Right. It came in on Thursday or Friday, whatever it is. And whatever fishes they got on Monday, they didn't sell on Saturday. And you don't want that fish.
Okay, that's good advice. I like that. Don't go to the hospital in July and teaching hospital. Don't eat fish on Monday. That's good. Yeah. But look, I'm optimistic about that. Just like technology can solve something like catalytic converters or carbon capture, we're going to solve a lot of these things that people wring their hands about. Oh my God, what happens to truck drivers? It could be the symbiosis thing. It could just be truck drivers stay in the truck a long time. If you think about a self-driving truck, yeah, I can do the long haul from Detroit to maybe Riverside County. And then it's got to stop, and you got to break down the bulk and put it on a smaller truck and then take it in the city. There is quite a need for a human being at the interface of dropping it off and talking to a grumpy customer and the stuff in the back of the truck. So it's not clear to me the robots take over everything. The truck driver may evolve from long, boring, long-haul trips into being more of a troubleshooter on the journey and helping deal with humans. I don't know, but
it may be is the garbage truck an analogy? Because when I was a kid, I remember, actually, this is a side note, but I remember at one point as a kid wanting to be a garbage man, because I thought, first of all, hanging off the back of a really cool looking truck sounds like fun. Because there was 3 guys, right? There was a driver and 2 guys who hung off the back who sort of helped each other throw in the garbage in and then putting the bins back on the street. There's 3 guys, right? So I always thought that looked like fun. And the other thing is, the kid logic, you only have to work 1 day a week.
Yeah, exactly. Because you don't know there's other routes. I get it. Yeah,
exactly.
Only 1 day at my house. Yeah.
But anyway, so today, of course, when the garbage truck comes, there's not 3 guys on it. There's 1 guy on it, and that guy actually never gets out of the truck. That the robot grabs the bin and puts it in, and he's just making sure the truck doesn't kill anybody and that the bin gets picked up properly and all that. But this may make me sound stupid, but like I look at the modern day garbage truck, and I find it quite fascinating. When the guy shows up, I stand there for a second, watch it, and go, wow, look at how much has changed in my life. It's an interesting thing. Yeah. And so is that sort of what happens?
Yeah, that's a great story. That's a great story. I'll give you one other thing about the robot apocalypse that really troubles me. And Bill Gates said this: we have to tax robots. And so I don't think he quite meant that, but think of what that implies. Somehow the robots have property and income and wealth. They live in a house and you tax them like a human being because they own something. No, they don't. There's no robot to tax. It's just a machine. But people anthropomorphize these things, and they run into sort of, in this case, just an illogical statement by Bill Gates. And I'm sure he can repair it and say, we should tax the owners of the robots, or we should tax the sellers of the robots. I'm not sure which way to go. Let's talk about it. So automation comes in. You have computers instead of people doing calculations, etc. We've had automation for a long time, since the Luddites, and it's good. It creates more productivity. Do you tax the automation? Well, if you do, it slows down it coming into the economy. And so I guess in China, they'll have more robots and we'll lose the robot gap and everybody gets upset. But the point is, why would you put a tax on a robot you're trying to sell to automate a factory or something, or a garbage truck? So conceptually, that's really stupid. And it would slow down automation, not speed it up, or in a world economy. It's a dumb idea. On the other hand, you tax the sellers of the robots. There's some kind of premium for the AI sellers. Again, why would you do that? Why are they any more evil than all the other people doing bad things? I don't know. So I think it's an illogical statement. It's trying to get to this concept in people's heads that the robot overlords will own all the wealth. But they're just machines. If you put a robot in a factory like Tesla, poor old Elon Musk, his little NUMMI plant over at Toyota used to run, has twice as many people per car produced as Toyota ran 30 years ago. Maybe it's 40 years ago, whatever. How stupid is this? He can't make the plant work efficiently, and he's got a lot of robots in it. So if you tax him for having more robots, you're actually running him into the ground faster than he's doing it himself.
So he's got more people than Toyota, and obviously meaningful amounts more automation than Toyota had 30 or 40 years ago.
That's correct. And that should raise a gigantic little red flag. Maybe our presumption about robots are wrong. Maybe you put in robots.
You mentioned this last time, and that's one of, like, our whole discussion has just been bashing around in my head, and that's a big part of it. The other thing I think about, when I first was coming up, I started my first company, it was at the very tail end of the typing pool. Like, I still remember some typing pools. And, people of today, of course, forget there used to be these huge, like, I don't know what they call them, maybe bullpens. I don't know what they called them, these huge open areas. And it was typically gals and just going bang, 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 bang on typewriters. And so if back then, if you'd said, well, listen, because of what the personal computer is doing, it's clearly going to get rid of the need of the typing pool, and all these people are going to be out of jobs. And so, hey, Bill, we got to tax personal computers, personal computer operating systems, personal computer applications, because they're destroying the typing pool.
I don't think he would have agreed to that. That's his PC. I get you. That is so brilliant.
The thing that I've been thinking about is, isn't it interesting that the pirate goes from being the pirate who storms the castle to being like the government overlord who, like, all they want to do is protect the way it now is, as opposed to be the pirate that they used to be, who's kind of upping the apple cart, so to speak.
That's great. You got it. That's a great way to conclude this. You've got it. That's so good. Yeah, let's just let the AI thing evolve. Technology will probably solve its own problem here, like we did with other things like carbon capture, catalytic converters. Let's not try to impose some crazy regulatory scheme or tax or fear-mongering scheme until the problem emerges. It hasn't emerged yet. There's more chess playing today than 20 years ago. There's every time you automate something, there's more jobs for people. My favorite story is desktop publishing, back to Bill Gates and the PC or Apple. And before desktop publishing, there were typesetters who would take this lead stuff and print. You've seen it in old movies about newspapers. After desktop publishing, they all went away. But there are 10 times more jobs for people dealing with fonts than there were in 1980. So just like the Luddites, we got rid of one set of typesetters doing horribly stupid work in big, complicated factories. And we have 10 times the number of people working in the same category that's much more creative and et cetera.
It's sort of the place where I land on this is, and look, maybe I'm just validating my own miserable life, but what all of this says to me is what there is to do as a curious person, as an entrepreneurial person, is to try to hang out on the edges of this stuff. That's why I like talking to you. Like, I learn something every time. Try to talk to smart people, try to educate myself, try to read, and try to say, the question I always ask myself, because everybody's an expert on what everyone else should do, right? So I always try to ask myself, well, if I was smart and I was me, what would I do, right? To try to get a third person perspective on myself. And, ever since our discussion, my discussion with Kevin, my discussions with guys like Maples and Ann and lots of these other smart people in Silicon Valley, I just am going, wow, look at the list of things that are going on right now. If you start to list them out, it starts to be really long. Robots and AI and machine learning and drones and 3D printing. Did you see this recently? There was a young gal who threw out the first pitch at the Giants game with her 3D printed hands.
No, that is so wonderful.
I saw this online.
Prosthetic arm. It's brilliant.
And I think maybe Google it. She might have two, but she definitely threw out the first pitch with a 3D printed arm. And my buddy Jordan French is a founder of a 3D printing pizza and food company. And it's like, you hear about these things that we talk about. They feel like they're very forward leaning. They feel like they're in the future. And then one day you look on sfgate.com and there's this pretty little 8-year-old girl or however old she was, and she's pitching with 3D printed hands.
Hey, did she throw a strike? It may be better.
Yeah. No, and actually it's funny. My best friend growing up, he has 2 boys, and they were here visiting last summer. And his eldest boy is, I don't know, 14-ish, somewhere in there. His name's Timmy. And I said, so, hey, Timmy, what are you thinking? And we spent a lot of time talking. They were here for, enough time that we got to go on some hikes and really talk to the kid. And you know what the kid wants to do? He wants to be a prosthetic designer.
Okay. Because
his theory goes like this. Not only are you going to have this going on that we just had, but the stuff's going to get to a place where you're going to say, my regular arm is actually not that functional. And this new cool 3D printing arm has like 15 more use cases other than what I can provide. So I'm going to cut my arm off and build a custom prosthetic arm. This is the 14-year-old has got this theory that this is going to be the future. And so he wants to be a prosthetic designer, not just for people who, if you will, traditional applications of prosthetics, but he envisions a world where people will be supplementing their physical bodies with prosthetic pieces. And he's got this theory.
Well, look, I don't think we'll cut our arms off, but if you could put some very nice glove and sort of extension of your arm, you could probably throw a 120-mile-an-hour fastball because you're whipping it with mechanical assist. He's onto something. There'll probably be 10 times more prosthetic designers, just like 10 times more font people in 10, 15 years than there are today. He's onto something.
So anyway, all this conversation, you have woken me up. You've been a part of a handful of folks in the last 6 months who really woken me up. And the big place I land is I need to fire up my curiosity. I need to hang out with as many smart people on the leading edge of this thinking as possible. And then I just need to be willing to play with entrepreneurs, play with venture capital, play with people who are dancing on this stuff and, see if I can help in any way. And just, because the aha I had was this, and it really happened after our conversation and after my conversation with Kevin and reading his book, that if you guys are right that it's 1897, then not being in the game, not playing in this world, not experimenting is kind of crazy. Like, this is a fun time to be hanging out at the leading edge of business and technology thinking, and I should be doing that. That's sort of the gift that you've given me.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. Your podcast is terrific, and maybe you can take your platform and participate or shape the next 15 years. It's going to be amazing. I think people are not reflecting on this is the fourth industrial revolution right in front of us. It really is 1897, before there was telephones, electricity, and washing machines and cars everywhere. You could kind of see it, but it wasn't there. 15 years later, 1912, you couldn't imagine how quickly you got into the future. I think we're right there. And I think you're right. The choices we should make in our position is how do we participate and shape this as opposed to just let it happen? Because you have a platform. You could do a lot of shaping here.
So thank you for saying that. It's true. And I'm blown away that that's true. Because this thing's really only been going a little longer than, a little more than a year. And so the fact that that has happened is really cool. And the fun thing about it is, I get to hang out on the edge of this thinking with you and with other folks who are, we had Paul Holland on not that long ago. He shares how he built this insanely green house and that whole story, right? And that's an amazing story. Another one we did not too long ago, with this guy named Paul Austin on. He's the leading LSD micro-dosing coach in the world.
Oh, there's a new one. I didn't hear nobody him.
He says at the end of the discussion, this is the first non-psychedelic podcast he's ever been on because the mainstream media won't touch him. And we got some negative email from people. Hey, LSD is a drug, and what are you doing? And you're promoting this and all that. We got a bunch of that. And I tried to respond to say, look, we're not advocating it. It's a curious topic. People in Silicon Valley are doing it. And oh, by the way, the leading authority on genius and savantism and autism, Dr. Daryl Treffitt, who was on Legends and Losers, says that there's more exploration needed here because it's worthy of investigation. And so I guess to your point, the fun I'm having in my life now is a gift I never thought I would get, which is the ability to sort of exercise my curious mind, shine a light on kind of very leading edge topics that for whatever reason aren't being discussed generally in a broad way or in a really thorough way. And I can't believe anybody wants to come and do this with me, but it's like, really? I get to have these conversations and people engage in them. It's like, fuck, that's really cool.
You've got to be now on the radio. They got to get you on the radio, like that AM America, whatever that thing was, Coast to Coast AM that guy used to be on in Vegas. Great show. But the thing is, you're dealing with really interesting topics. Paul Hall and Linda Yates, they're a zero energy house in Portola Valley, just around the corner. It's an amazing achievement. It's not been widely noted. It should be. It's possible to do it economically is what the point is. We should all be thinking that way.
The argument that the economics, it actually, if you plan to own the house over a long period of time, I forget what period, there is a conversion point where the incremental expense, if you want to call it that, for going, he built what has been rated as the greenest house in America, that there is a crossover point if you own the home long enough. And I forget what that crossover point is, but that there's actually, if you have a longer term view, the economics play out.
I love it.
Yeah.
Anyway, look, this has been fantastic.
Duncan, thank you so much.
Love being on the show.
I love having you. I come back every other week.
Run out of things to say, but I'm going to keep listening to your show. It's a great show. So everybody should listen to this show.
Thank you so much. And I love that you want to come back on, and you should come back on a regular basis, because I love this, and you're very good for my life and my brain, and I appreciate it.
Fair enough. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Anyway,
brother.
You take care.
You too.
Take care. Bye.
Woo! Duncan Davidson for the second time on Legends and Losers. If you know somebody who would love this episode with Duncan, why not share it with them now? And we would love you just a little bit extra if you gave us a review on iTunes. As I shared on a recent episode, the government is funding our competitors. That is to say, NPR takes your tax dollars and turns them into podcasts. And nobody's sending Legends and Losers tax dollars. And so if you love independent podcasts like Legends and Losers, we are getting more and more pressure from NPR and others, but I'll take on the others. I object to my tax dollars funding my competitors, and I object to the whole idea that independent podcasters would get pushed out by NPR. So if you love independent podcasts, there's two things you can do. Number one, share these shows. That's the only way we can combat their distribution. When you share on social media, when you email your friends, it makes a giant difference. And your ratings and reviews on iTunes, on Spotify, on Stitcher, on YouTube, or wherever else you consume Legends and Losers make a giant difference. So if you care about independent podcasting, then please support your favorite independent podcasts. Now, our sponsor, NetSuite, wants to help you turbocharge your growth. As you may know, we are at one of the lowest levels of recorded entrepreneurship in America. It is time to support entrepreneurs in growing. And NetSuite is doing everything they can to do that. NetSuite is the platform for growth for small E entrepreneurs. We didn't want our first sponsor on Legends and Losers to be some, maker of cat shampoo. NetSuite shares our mission to empower entrepreneurs. NetSuite is the platform for growth, providing you the tools that you need to get a handle on real-time visibility into all areas of your operation, from your finances to dealing with compliance, to order management, integration with your website, and even HR. And NetSuite allows you to run your business from your phone, which is a very smart thing to do. If you have a smartphone, why not be smart and run your business from that phone with real-time integrated data to keep you on top of your business. Now, NetSuite is offering our good friends, our listeners, a 1-hour growth review with an expert in your industry, because NetSuite has special implementations of their technology for different verticals. So go to netsuite.com/legends, and you'll be able to schedule a time with a growth expert in your industry who can help you unpack some ideas as well as deal with some barriers and get you going on a new pathway to growth. So go to netsuite.com/legends today to set up your free NetSuite growth review. All right. We would like to thank the good people at Bullpen Capital, Duncan's firm. Check them out at bullpencap.com. And my new bestseller, the #1 bestseller written by Heather Clancy and myself, Niche Down, How to Become Legendary by Being Different. Check us out at nichedownbook.com. The good people at Equity Directory. If you are in the startup ecosystem, if you are an advisor or a coach or a developer or a designer, and you want to work with some very cool startups, and you're willing to do that for mostly equity, Equity Directory is the network for you. Check them out, equitydirectory.com. A nonprofit that I love, founded by my good friend Tim Rode, onelifefullylived.org. This is the nonprofit helping you dream, plan, and live your best life. Check them out. Stop Riding the Pine with Jamie J., one of my favorite podcasts. Jamie is the nicest man in podcasting. Subscribe. The amazing coffee and the official coffee of Legends and Losers, Verve Coffee Roasters in Santa Cruz, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Tokyo, at all or virtually all the tech companies that matter in Silicon Valley, and always at vervecoffee.com. Also, huge shout out to the official sock supplier to Legends and Losers, John's Crazy Socks. Check out johnscrazysocks.com. They are made in America. They're beautiful. They're fun. We got some custom socks made for Legends and Losers with our logo on them that are absolutely gorgeous. And you can buy your socks there. Or if you're a business and you want an incredible giveaway that people will always remember getting, you can do a special order with John's Crazy Socks. johnscrazysocks.com. And growwire.com. This is the new place on the internet for entrepreneurs who want to grow their business. Check out growwire.com and the good people at the World Wildlife Fund, because we only have one planet. Check out wwf.org. Now, we must remind you that this oddcast is the sole property of the Legends and Losers Oddcast Network, and we would love you if you shared the shit out of it right now. All rights do remain disturbed. We must warn you that every episode clearly contains nuts, and the producers of this oddcast may have been consuming libations. Remember to call your mother. Beware of Prii in the passing lane. Get over, would you? In the case of bullshit interviews, take 2 Legends and Losers and tweet us in the morning. Remember to introduce 2 people you love to 2 podcasts you love. Independent podcasters need you more than ever. If you want independent podcasts to stay independent, introduce 2 people you love to podcasts you love. Don't forget, there's no stopping the cretins from hopping. And today, our deepest apologies go to Equifax CEO Richard Smith. Sorry, Dickie. We just ran out of time for you. That's it, my friends. Thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing you again soon on Legends and Losers.